Heyo folks, Thanksgiving has come again. But this is no ordinary Thanksgiving. According to many sources, this year marks the 400th anniversary since the first Thanksgiving. That's right, going all the way back to 1621. Although, if we're gonna be technical, it hasn't actually been classified as a holiday until much later. Washington came to that decision in 1789. Sometime later on, Lincoln revised the decision and marked Thanksgiving down on the 26th of every November. And even later on, Roosevelt sealed the fate in 1941 by marking it on the fourth Thursday. And it's been that way ever since. There's quite a lot to enjoy this day, whether it's the family gatherings, or the Macy's parade, or the turkey, or one of my favorite activities, pulling up whatever specials you can find on streaming services. While I usually prefer Christmas specials, I always found Thanksgiving specials from shows or franchises interesting regardless. Maybe it's just me, but I find it kinda neat to see how these characters prepare for Thanksgiving. And there are more examples than I was expecting. So, while waiting for everyone else to show up for the feast, I might as well dive into another countdown. We're going through what I consider the top 7 Thanksgiving specials. Why 7 specifically? Because I'm a superstitious schmuck who's hoping for some luck. Ed the Pilgrim, from Mr. Ed. If you remember back in my DuckTales review, I brought up that I was a huge fan of Alan Young growing up. And this show was one of Young's biggest times to shine, playing as the character Wilbur, right next to his favorite horse. This episode's got a simple plot. Wilbur and his wife Carol make plans to have their Thanksgiving dinner at a restaurant, which leads to a few arguments, and their issues start oozing onto their neighbors, the Addisons. And while all this is happening, Ed starts feeling left out and tries everything he can to make them all stay. And just like the Christmas story the show had, Ed tells the story of the holiday's origin in his own way. And it had its moments. Roger certainly made a fitting Pilgrim governor. The only downside this episode had was that there were a few elements which have aged rather poorly. Like that brief quarantine bit, which I know some folks out there are gonna try to crack jokes about. And at times I feel like the stereotyping was going a little overboard. But they never really went too far. And given how old the show is, I can kinda understand what they were going for. In general, this episode delivered some decent gags, as well as a nice festive feel. This is the kind of show that had a charm that you can't really get from sitcoms nowadays. And even after so long, it's still a nice episode to watch this time of year. The Platonic Permutation and the Thanksgiving Decoupling from The Big Bang Theory. Love it or hate it, this was one of the most popular sitcoms of the century. I decided to put these two on the list as a tie for a few reasons, seeing as how they seem to be the only Thanksgiving special the show had, but still they had their ups and downs. The worst the decoupling gave us was a running joke that could be uncomfortable to some.
This is completely inappropriate. You can't keep comparing yourself to a slave.
Yes, Miss Amy.
My god, this is starting to turn into a trope. The permutation might not be as bad, but that mostly depends on your opinion of Elon Musk. And besides those, the episodes still had their moments. In the permutation, Leonard and Penny share Thanksgiving together. Sheldon and Amy try patching up their relationship, and the rest of the gang volunteer at a soup kitchen. Meanwhile, in the decoupling, the whole gang meets up at Howard's place for Thanksgiving dinner. One of my favorite types of sitcom episodes, or TV episodes in general, is get-togethers with the cast, like what they did with the love card displacement. It's just so fun to see this many characters together. Sheldon starts his bond with Mike, and we get some technical closure between Zach and Penny. They were charming enough. Now I'll just need to find the time to catch up on the rest of the show. Apparently I'm close since I took a break after season 9, and that break seemed to be longer than expected. Overall, these two episodes made some decent Thanksgiving specials. They helped deliver the feel of the holiday, and they were amusing enough. An indecent Thanksgiving proposal from Bob's Burgers. I always felt this show was a huge mixed bag. The jokes are mostly hit or miss, but to me, this was one of the better episodes, and one of the more memorable holiday specials from the show. So this year for Thanksgiving, Fishoder's inviting the Belchers over to his place. However, he's only doing it so he can have Linda fake a relationship with him, which involves Louise, Jean, and Tina having to pretend to be his kids. And all for the sake of impressing a woman, who ends up turning into a psychopath. And what about Bob? Fishoder's making him work as the chef for dinner. And needless to say, this really makes him feel left out, as this takes time away from his favorite Thanksgiving traditions. But still, there are some nice elements in the episode. Bob develops a friendship with Lance, his turkey, which ends up not just amusing, but kinda touching too. As always, H. John Benjamin aced the performance. But one of the most interesting parts of this episode was, well, I know it's gonna sound weird, but Bob ends up losing his mind after drinking absinthe. But the interesting part is the series of hallucinations he goes through while it's happening. My personal favorite being the My Neighbor Totoro spoof. Even though I was never that much into the movie, the scene was still very creative, both this and the original. This was a neat episode, and it sure helps give off the kind of charm the show's capable of. Turkeys Away! From WKRP Cincinnati. This is a show I don't see a lot of people talking about, which is kind of surprising. Sure, it may be old, but I've seen people talk about older shows like Mr. Ed. I guess this just fell into obscurity. Shame too. This show was very unique. This episode especially. Carlson comes up with an idea for a special project for Thanksgiving, and he won't shut up about it as he's around his co-workers. No one knows what he's got in store. All they know is this involves
20 live turkeys.
Fair warning, some people might not want to stick around for this. Carlson basically scared the town with a full-out turkey storm via helicopter. This was one of the best examples I've seen for a joke's build-up. Carlson kept building it up, and when we finally get to the joke, it felt worth it. I found this much funnier than I was expecting. They never showed the turkeys falling, but it's the implications that made the joke better.
Hey folks, I don't know how much longer the crowd is running for their lives.
It's short, but still very clever. I know for a fact they wouldn't do this kind of thing nowadays, as this material would never fly, among other things, but it's still worth recommending. This was one of the most underrated specials I've seen, with a funny story and even funnier lines.
As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.
Bart vs. Thanksgiving, from The Simpsons. Oh boy, it's been years since I've seen The Simpsons, and this episode in particular still holds up really well. Unfortunately, Bart is just a tad more obnoxious and unlikable than usual in this episode, to the point where he straight up trashes Lisa's table display. And the effects of this disaster start spreading to the rest of The Simpsons too, which ends up lasting for most of the episode. As for Bart's side of the story, he goes back and forth between regretting his actions and then going back to being nasty. But this tennis game of emotions has a very sweet ending where Lisa talks it over with him, and this kinda helps make up for it. Overall, while Bart may be a huge schmuck at times, you can see a lot of development coming from him in this episode. And looking back on the show as a whole, maybe I should check out some of the modern episodes, see if there are any good ones that came out recently. And man, I'm starting to miss that gem of a character, Sideshow Bob. Wherefore art thou, Kelsey Grammer? Garfield's Thanksgiving. Garfield being put on a diet has been a common trope in the comics for years, but being put on a diet the day before Thanksgiving? Now that sounds like comedic potential. As you'd expect, there are some side skits that fit with the plot, and yes, these were directly from the comic series. But it's not like the franchise hasn't done that before, and besides, it's so interesting to see the comics come to life, in the same style too. And of course there's the Thanksgiving portions. After inviting Liz to his place, John's struggling with the dinner. Well, that and Garfield resorts to sabotage. But then Liz decides to temporarily end Garfield's diet so he can enjoy Thanksgiving. Later on, Grandma stops by to fix everything. And that scene around the end where they all enjoyed a feast together was very touching. I love this special, and this era of Garfield in general. This is the kind of special that can really help deliver a nice Thanksgiving feel. A Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. This is a special everyone starts thinking about when Thanksgiving rolls around. Charles Schultz and Bill Melendez were pure wonders, and still beloved even to this day. They and their team gave it all they got to breathe new life into the Peanuts franchise, and gave us all these movies and specials. And A Charlie Brown Thanksgiving has gotta be right up there as one of my favorites. As far as the Peanuts specials went, at least at the time, I found this to be the most impressive of the bunch. The visuals were very appealing, or most of the time anyway, and I loved the voice acting in this one. Todd Barbee was always my favorite Charlie Brown voice actor. He did an amazing job expressing Charlie Brown's emotions. No offense to the other Charlie VAs, but there were some who were just painfully flat. Besides Barbie, the rest of the cast in the short were very enjoyable. Everyone felt like they were legit having a good time recording for it. Oh yeah, and there's the story too. Peppermint Patty decides to crash in on Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving plans, as well as bring some of their friends over to his place. So he and Linus have to put together a quick Thanksgiving meal to keep them satisfied. I've heard rumors that this was based on one Thanksgiving Schultz had to go through, as his wife had decided to break up with him at the time. I can't seem to find any details to back that up, but should it be true, it's just too interesting to ignore. All this leads to a rare scene where we see development from Peppermint Patty of all people. She actually stops to think about her actions. This is a side to her I wasn't expecting. And that scene at the end with Snoopy and Woodstock together is just so sweet. It's very nice seeing them sharing their Thanksgiving together. There's a lot to enjoy in this special. No Thanksgiving feels complete without it. But of course, as anyone would tell you, today isn't about the specials or anything else I brought up these past few minutes. It's about the spirit of thankfulness. Looking back on everything there is to be thankful for. And given how the world's been in recent years, it seems that feeling is needed now more than ever. So be sure to visit your family or even your friends and share your thankful mood together this Thanksgiving, as I will too. So, Christmas is coming up now. I got a sick project coming up this year, and I'm hoping to have it up on time. 4 centuries of Thanksgiving have come and gone, and depending on how the future holds up, we still got another century to look forward to. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone!